Holy shit. He said what?
Everybody trying to be a victim. Like, what's this girl, Meghan Markle? Seemed like a nice lady, just complaining. I was like, didn't she hit the light skin lottery? And still going on complaining, acting all dumb like she don't know nothing. Going on Oprah, I didn't know. I had no idea how racist they were. It's the royal family. You didn't Google these motherfuckers?
It kicked off like any other stand-up comedy night. Lights dimmed low, crowd buzzing with anticipation, Chris Rock walking straight into the spotlight like he owned the room. But what unfolded next didn't feel like normal comedy at all. It felt sharp, uncomfortable, and for many watching, almost like a public takedown unfolding in real time, with Meghan Markle placed right at the center of the storm. There was no soft entry, no easing into the punchlines, no careful setup to warm the crowd. Rock went direct, no hesitation, aiming straight at the cultural narrative surrounding Meghan Markle. In less than a minute, according to audience reactions and clips circulating online, the tone shifted from light entertainment to something far more cutting, turning a widely known public figure into the punchline of the moment. And what made it hit even harder was the reaction in the room. It wasn't always the jokes themselves that landed the deepest impact. It was the silence that followed them. That brief pause where the audience processed what was just said and slowly began reacting, laughing nervously, then louder as realization set in. For years, Meghan had been framed in media narratives as the relatable outsider, the one who didn't fully belong to royal traditions, someone caught between worlds. But in that comedic framing, Rock's set, according to viral interpretations, flipped that image entirely, painting her instead as someone critics say,
the biggest addiction in America is attention. We are addicted to attention. Easiest way to get attention is to be a victim.
Have you ever seen that video? No.
Pull that video up because it's one of my favorites.
They're so racist. They're so racist. Some of the shit she went through was not racism. It was just some in-law shit. Because she's complaining. I'm like, what the fuck is she talking about? Oprah, they're so racist. They wanted to know how brown the baby's going to be. I'm like, that's not racist. Because even black people want to know.
Leaned into fame while publicly distancing herself from it. The shift wasn't subtle. It was immediate. And the crowd energy reportedly reflected that shock. And that's where things escalated. What made it even more intense was how quickly the narrative flipped in public discussion afterward. The performance wasn't just seen as jokes, it was interpreted by many online commentators as a reset button on an already controversial public image. In that moment, the idea of Meghan as a misunderstood figure started to fade in the background of internet conversations. For years, her public image had been tied to a very specific storyline, that she entered royal life unprepared, overwhelmed by tradition, and caught off guard by the pressures of the institution. It was often framed like a modern fairy tale turning dark at the edges, a Hollywood actress stepping into palace walls and discovering something colder underneath the surface. It sounds dramatic already, but critics of that narrative say it was never that simple. Chris Rock, in the way clips and commentary describe his approach, didn't ease into that story. He reportedly shattered it head-on. He didn't tiptoe around the perception. He challenged it directly in a way that made audiences laugh, while also questioning what they believed they knew. One of the most circulated comparisons from the set likened the situation.
What the f*** is she talking about? She didn't know. It's the royal family. They're the original racists.
To someone entering a highly publicized profession and claiming they had no idea what it was. The crowd reaction in clips shows shock, followed by laughter, the kind that comes when people recognize a familiar contradiction being pointed out in a blunt way. And that moment mattered because it reframed the narrative. It suggested that the unaware outsider storyline didn't fully match the public timeline people remembered. Meghan's relationship with Prince Harry, her years in the public eye before and after joining the royal family, and her media presence were all factors people immediately started re-evaluating online. In that sense, the joke wasn't just humor, it acted like a permission slip for audiences to revisit assumptions they had already been questioning. That's the thing about a well-placed roast in modern media culture. It doesn't just land in the room, it spreads instantly across platforms, reshaping how people talk about the subject long after the show ends. And Meghan wasn't present in that room to respond to any of it. But in the digital age, absence doesn't mean silence. It often means amplification. Once the special circulated online, commentary didn't just stay within comedy circles. It exploded into social media feeds, reaction videos, and opinion threads across platforms. From that point onward, every discussion around her public image seemed to accelerate. Late-night discussions, online satire, and commentary accounts all began referencing the set in various ways, each adding their own interpretation. What was once a controlled media narrative began fragmenting into competing viewpoints, each louder than the last. And the ripple effect didn't stop there. Short clips from the set spread rapidly across TikTok, X, formerly Twitter, and YouTube compilations. Some focused on audience reactions,
Posting up pathetic pictures. This is me eating sushi. Like me. This is me 25 years ago when I was hot. Like me. Oh, it's fucking sad.
others on specific lines, and many were edited with commentary overlays that intensified the tone even further. In Britain especially, commentary culture reacted quickly. Comedians and commentators began drawing parallels, highlighting contradictions they believed existed in how public messaging was framed versus how commercial deals and media appearances unfolded. These interpretations varied widely, but the central theme remained consistent. Public perception was shifting fast. Across the Atlantic, late-night hosts also leaned into the moment. They picked up on widely discussed talking points, turning them into recurring jokes about branding, media deals, and public statements that had previously gone viral in different contexts. The repetition across shows made the jokes feel even more entrenched in pop culture conversation. Even hosts known for softer humour occasionally touched on the topic. And that contrast made it stand out even more because it wasn't limited to one type of media voice. It was everywhere, repeating in slightly different forms, like echoes bouncing through entertainment culture. What stood out most was how quickly the jokes converged. Different comedians, different platforms, different countries, yet similar punchlines started appearing. That kind of overlap in comedy isn't random. It usually signals a shared public narrative forming in real time. By that point, online discussion had fully absorbed it. Social media users began remixing interviews, public clips, and televised moments, adding humour, commentary, and dramatic edits that reframe familiar footage in entirely new contexts. Even older clips resurfaced and gained new interpretations.
Hey, it's the husband formerly known as Prince. Any luck getting a job?
Oh, they had me driving for Uber Eats, but there were too many damn rules. Don't touch the food. Don't taste the food. Drive on the road.
I'm sorry, Rowdy Weddy.
Through the lens of current discussion, some creators focused on perceived contradictions in messaging. Others turned entire interviews into satirical breakdowns, slowing down expressions, zooming into pauses, and highlighting wording choices in ways that changed the tone completely. The result was a shift in how audiences consumed public appearances, not as neutral interviews, but as content open to reinterpretation. And once that shift happened, control over the narrative became harder to maintain because memes and clips don't move slowly. They spread instantly, mutate quickly, and often outpace any official response or clarification. Late-night television added another layer to it. Sketch shows and comedy programs leaned into exaggerated portrayals, turning public figures into simplified characters for humor. In those sketches, Meghan and Harry were often depicted through a comedic lens emphasizing contradictions, media attention, and celebrity culture dynamics. Shows like Saturday Night Live amplified this format by exaggerating traits for comedic effect. Other hosts, including Jimmy Fallon and Stephen Colbert, also incorporated references in monologues and segments, each adapting the narrative to their own comedic style, ranging from light humor to sharper commentary. What made it stick was repetition. When multiple platforms start referencing the same storyline, it becomes embedded in pop culture conversation, whether people agree with it or not. And once that happens, the narrative no longer belongs to one source. It becomes collective, shaped by thousands of voices online and offline. And that's where the cycle kept building, faster than traditional media could respond. Late-night mockery has this strange kind of power, and it comes from repetition, and it hits harder than people realize. The same jokes get passed from one host to another, then another, until they stop sounding like comedy and start sounding like something closer to public belief that just keeps echoing louder and louder every night. When that cycle builds up, it changes how people see things in real time. Meghan Markle, in this ongoing media conversation, wasn't just treated as a passing topic anymore according to online commentary and entertainment analysts. She slowly became a permanent fixture in the late-night landscape. Not a guest appearance, not a short trend, but a recurring character that kept showing up in the same style of jokes over and over again. And once a narrative gets locked in like that, it becomes extremely hard to escape it, no matter what kind of interviews, public statements, or PR efforts come afterward. Comedians working club stages push things even further because those environments are completely unfiltered. No network delay, no soft edits, no cautious rewriting of punchlines, just raw delivery, loud crowds, and instant reactions that shape the direction of the entire room. Some comedians like Simon Rodkin, as mentioned in online discussions and viral clips, reportedly went straight at Meghan's Netflix documentary, framing it as overly emotional storytelling packed with dramatic visuals and slow pacing that felt designed to push sympathy rather than present, neutral storytelling. According to those comedy takes, even simple production choices like background music or emotional pauses were turned into points of humour, exaggerated as if every detail was part of a carefully staged performance rather than a documentary-style narrative. And then the commentary shifted toward royal etiquette, moments like bowing or curtsying, where some comedians joked that the level of reaction being described seemed overly intense compared to everyday life expectations. One comparison that circulated in online summaries framed it in a way like reacting strongly to minor travel inconveniences, and audiences laughed because it reframed something formal into something relatable and simple. Other comedians leaned into Prince Harry's memoir content as well, especially widely discussed excerpts from Spare, turning emotional reflections into punchlines that painted him, according to critics, and satire commentary, as overly sheltered or disconnected from everyday struggles. These interpretations didn't always claim to be accurate reflections, but in comedy form, exaggeration is part of the structure. And that's what made it spread so quickly online. But Meghan remained the central focus in most of these routines, almost like the anchor point of the entire comedic framing. Her carefully crafted public statements, polished interviews, and controlled messaging style were repeatedly described in comedy spaces as overly refined, almost too rehearsed to feel spontaneous. And in stand-up environments, nothing gets softened or filtered for sensitivity. There's no broadcast delay, no safety net of editing. It's just immediate reaction, loud laughter, and sometimes uncomfortable pauses that still turn into laughs because the crowd energy takes over. Once those clips hit social media, the momentum becomes unstoppable. A single performance gets chopped into short segments, reposted across platforms, stitched with reactions, and turned into viral content that travels far beyond the original audience. By the time that happens, the conversation is no longer controlled by the stage anymore. It's controlled by the internet, and the internet never slows down. At that point in the broader online discussion, Meghan's public image wasn't just being questioned in isolated jokes anymore. It was being reshaped through repetition across thousands of clips, edits, and commentary threads that kept reinforcing the same narrative angles. And whether people agreed with the jokes or not, the repetition itself started building familiarity, and familiarity often gets mistaken for truth in digital spaces. Then came South Park. And according to pop culture analysts and entertainment commentary, that moment pushed everything into another level entirely. Because when South Park targets a public figure, it doesn't just reference them, it transforms them into a symbolic version of themselves inside satire. The Worldwide Privacy Tour episode became one of those moments where animation and satire blended into cultural commentary, that spread instantly across the internet. The visual of characters loudly demanding privacy while traveling in extreme luxury created a contrast that didn't even need dialogue to explain. The imagery alone carried the entire joke, and that's why it spread so fast. According to online reactions, that episode wasn't just seen as humor, it was interpreted as a condensed version of public debates already happening online, compressed into animated form. Every contradiction people had discussed before suddenly appeared in exaggerated cartoon format, and that made it easy for audiences to repeat, remix, and share. Other animated shows joined in the cultural wave too, with Family Guy and similar programs using quick jokes and throwaway lines that reduced public figures into brief punchlines about fame and wealth. Even short jokes like that can hit hard because they don't need setup. They rely on recognition, and recognition spreads instantly in meme culture. Once someone becomes a caricature in animation, that version often sticks longer than any real-life interview or clarification ever could. And that's where things shift from simple comedy into something deeper, because once a cartoon version of a person becomes widely recognized, it competes directly with their real-world image. At that point, the audience perception starts splitting, and many people begin reacting more to the satire version than the actual public figure. That's why analysts often say animated satire has long-term cultural weight, because it becomes part of how people mentally file public figures in their memory. By the time the South Park episode fully circulated online, Meghan and Harry were no longer just subjects of discussion, they had become symbolic representations of a wider conversation about fame, privacy, and modern celebrity culture. And that symbolic framing is extremely difficult to reverse once it spreads. Then came Bill Maher, and his approach was completely different from the comedic exaggeration seen in cartoons or stand-up. Instead of punchlines, he used structured commentary and direct criticism, focusing on logic rather than jokes. According to widely shared discussions about his segment, Maher addressed contradictions in public narratives surrounding fame, privacy, and media attention in a very direct way. He pointed out what he framed as tension between wanting privacy while also maintaining a highly visible public presence, and he delivered it in a way that felt more analytical than comedic. That difference mattered because the tone wasn't designed for laughter, it was designed for reflection. He also drew comparisons to long-standing public figures who endured decades of media scrutiny without turning their experiences into entertainment content, which added another layer of contrast in his argument. And when he delivered the line about the public not being obligated to participate in personal narratives, according to audience reactions and commentary breakdowns, the room shifted from laughter to quiet attention. That silence became part of the impact because it wasn't about humor anymore, it was about interpretation. By the end of that discussion, Maher wasn't just reacting, he was breaking down the structure of a public image strategy and pointing out where he believed it created friction with audience perception. And that kind of analysis often sticks longer than jokes because it doesn't rely on humor, it relies on framing. At this stage of the broader cultural conversation, Meghan's image wasn't just being shaped by one comedian or one show anymore, it was being built through layers of repetition across different platforms, each reinforcing slightly different versions of the same narrative. Memes, commentary clips, reaction videos, and satirical sketches all started overlapping, creating a loop that kept feeding itself. What started as isolated comedic commentary slowly evolved into a shared cultural reference point where certain ideas kept reappearing in slightly different formats. And once that happens, even new public appearances start getting filtered through that existing framework. So interviews, statements, and public moments begin to feel like they are being interpreted through an already established lens rather than being seen fresh. That's where the long-term impact of comedy cycles becomes visible because they don't just create jokes, they create reference systems. And once those reference systems are in place, every new moment gets compared back to them automatically. At that point, even attempts at shifting narratives or introducing new messaging often get absorbed into the existing interpretation cycle because audiences are already conditioned by repetition, and repetition builds expectation, and expectation is one of the hardest things to break once it becomes culturally embedded. So the conversation stops being just about individual moments and starts becoming about patterns, perceived patterns, and repeated interpretations that keep circulating. And that's what keeps the entire cycle alive long after the original jokes were told. If you want more deep dives like this, make sure to stay tuned, because the story behind public perception, comedy culture, and media narratives doesn't end here. It keeps evolving every time the internet decides to laugh again.